In Vienna, a city filled with history, music, and grand concert halls, lived a man named Stefan Adler. He wasn't just any man. He was a legend in the world of classical music. People traveled from all over the world to hear him play. Performed in front of kings, queens, presidents, and at every famous venue anyone could name. His name was in magazines, newspapers, and music schools taught students about his performances. But with all his fame and talent came something else, an ego that was even bigger than the grand piano he played. Stefan didn't just believe he was the best. He believed no one else came close. He spoke often about how difficult the piano was, how years of study, the best teachers, and perfect technique were necessary to become a real pianist. According to him, self-taught people were just hobbyists, not worthy of serious stages. Many admired him, but many also whispered behind his back about his arrogance. At music festivals, Stefan often gave speeches and master classes. Young musicians would sit quietly, holding their breath, listening carefully, hoping to catch a word of praise from him. But more often than not, Stefan would only criticize. He would say things like, "Too much emotion ruins precision or feeling. Is nothing without perfection." Some students left crying. Others gave up on their dreams. To Stefan, it was all about discipline, not the heart. One bright summer afternoon, Stefan was invited to a prestigious music conservatory in Salzburg. The event was grand, with musicians and music lovers from all over Europe. It was meant to be a celebration of all forms of piano music, from classical masters to folk and modern pieces. Stefan, dressed in his usual expensive black suit, arrived with a confident walk and a small smile that never quite reached his eyes during a break. As he sipped his imported coffee, he overheard a group of students excitedly talking. They were gathered around a young boy who had just come back from a trip to Hallstatt, a small and beautiful village in the mountains. The boy was talking about a woman named Clara Weiss. Stefan didn't pay attention at first, but then he heard the boy say, "I swear when she plays, it's like the piano speaks." "I saw grown men cry." That made Stefan raise an eyebrow. Another student added, "She never trained professionally, but people say her music feels like magic. She doesn't even read sheet music. She just plays from memory and feeling." Stefan laughed. He couldn't help it. "Are you all really discussing some mountain village pianist as if she belongs on the same level as Chopin or Liszt?" he said loudly, making the group turn to him. "A real pianist needs control, precision, study, not some emotional village lullabies." The students fell silent. One brave girl spoke up. "With all due respect, sir, sometimes emotion can touch hearts in ways technique never can." That sentence stayed in Stefan's mind for a moment. But instead of agreeing, he shook his head. Let's not confuse talent with sentiment. Emotions are temporary. Skill is eternal. More people started to gather around. Some whispered, others looked uncomfortable.
Ow!
But Stefan was just getting started. "I challenge this Clara Weiss," he declared suddenly, his voice strong and clear. "Bring her to the Salzburg Gala next week. Let her sit on the same stage as me. Let her try to play beside me. Then we'll see who understands music." There was a strange silence after that. Some people thought it was a joke. Others were shocked. A few clapped nervously, unsure what to say. One organizer, an elderly man named Herr Bowman, stepped forward. He had known Stefan for years and often stayed silent around him. But now he smiled quietly and said, "Very well, Stefan. I happen to know Clara. I will invite her. But remember, music is not a war, it's a language." Stefan gave a tight smile. "Then let the world hear which of us speaks it better." News of the challenge spread quickly. Newspapers and social media had a field day. Elitist concert pianist challenges village musician to duel. The headlines screamed. People began to take sides. Some supported Stefan, saying he had earned his place through years of hard work. Others were curious, who was this Clara? Why had so many people spoken of her with such emotion? Back at his apartment that night, Stefan sat alone at his grand piano. The room was silent except for the ticking of a fancy clock and the occasional honk of cars from the street below. He played a few notes, then a complex piece from Beethoven. His fingers were fast, perfect. Not a single mistake. But something was missing, and deep inside, he felt it. Still, he ignored that feeling. To him, it was just nerves or nonsense. He began preparing for the gala as if it were a battle. He practiced every day, not with joy, but with determination. He wanted to prove a point. He even picked a difficult piece known for its complexity and speed. He imagined how people would cheer for him, how they would laugh at the idea that a simple woman thought she could challenge him. Meanwhile, in the quiet village of Hallstatt, Clara Weiss was living a very different life. But Stefan knew nothing of her yet. He didn't know that. She played the piano not for fame, but for healing. That she had once lost someone she loved dearly, and music was the only thing that helped her find peace. He didn't know that her fingers moved not by memory of notes, but by memories of moments, moments of joy, sadness, love, and hope. All he knew was that he was going to win. And yet in some corner of his heart, a question had begun to whisper. A small, soft doubt that he tried hard to silence. What if she was more than a story? If music had more to it than perfection? But Stefan Adler wasn't the type to back down from a challenge. Not yet. Not until the moment would come when everything he believed would be shaken by a woman who had never taken a single piano lesson in her life. That moment, however, was still a few days away. For now, the stage was being set. And Stefan, proud and confident, was ready to defend his throne. Little did he know, a quiet storm was coming, not loud, not angry, but powerful enough to make the world listen in awe. In a small village hidden between the snowy mountains and the calm lake of Hallstatt lived a quiet woman named Clara Weiss. Her life was simple and peaceful, far away from the noisy cities and their shining lights. The people in Hallstatt knew her as kind, gentle, and someone who never raised her voice. She worked in a small bakery with her aunt, waking up early every morning to knead dough and serve warm bread to the villagers. But what made Clara special was not her baking. It was the way she played the piano. Her house stood at the edge of the lake, a small wooden cottage with flowers in every window. Inside, in a corner of the living room, stood an old upright piano. It was not shiny or expensive. In fact, its wood was scratched, and a few keys were slightly out of tune. But to Clara, it was more precious than gold. This piano had belonged to her grandmother, who taught Clara to love music. Not through books or teachers, but by playing together on quiet afternoons. Her grandmother always said, "Music comes from the heart, not from paper." Clara had never gone to music school. She couldn't read sheet music like trained pianists. But when she sat in front of the piano and placed her fingers on the keys, something magical happened. She didn't play what was written. She played what she felt. Joy, sadness, love, pain, all of it came out through her music. People who heard her play said it was like listening to someone speak without words. Every weekend, children and neighbors would gather in her living room just to listen. Sometimes she played joyful tunes that made the children dance. Other times she played slow, gentle pieces that made even the strongest villagers wipe tears from their eyes. No one ever paid her for these little concerts, and Clara never asked for anything. She played because it gave her peace, because it helped others feel things they couldn't explain. One summer evening, Clara was finishing her shift at the bakery when a visitor arrived. It was Herr Bowman, an old friend of her family, and a respected music organizer from Salzburg. He smiled as he stepped inside the bakery and said, "Clara, I have something unusual to tell you." Clara looked up, surprised. She hadn't seen him in years. "I was at a music event in Salzburg," he continued, brushing flour off a chair before sitting down. "There's a famous pianist, there's Stefan Adler. You've probably heard his name." Clara nodded slowly. She had heard of Stefan. He was on TV sometimes, dressed in tuxedos, playing big concerts in grand halls. His face was always serious, his fingers fast like lightning. He was very different from her. Herr Bowman sighed. "I heard people talking about you, about how you play." Well, he didn't believe it. He challenged you to a public piano performance at the Salzburg Gala. Clara's eyes widened. "A challenge?" "Yes," said Herr Bowman. "He wants to play on the same stage as you, in front of hundreds of people. He thinks you're just a story, a fantasy, from a small town." Clara didn't speak for a while. Her heart beat a little faster. She wasn't angry. She was confused. She had never performed in front of a large crowd. She'd never even left Hallstatt for more than a day. The idea of going to a grand city like Salzburg and playing beside a world-famous pianist was something she had never imagined. Her fingers, used to playing in silence, suddenly felt cold. "But I'm not a real pianist," she whispered. "I didn't study. I don't know the rules." Herr Bowman smiled kindly. "That's what makes you special, Clara. You don't follow the rules. You follow your heart. And I think it's time the world heard it." That night, Clara sat alone. In her living room, staring at her piano, she remembered her grandmother's hands on the keys, her gentle voice saying, "Play what you feel, not what you think others want to hear." Clara had always followed that advice. She didn't care for fame. She didn't need applause. But something about this challenge felt different. Not because she wanted to prove anything, but because she wanted to remind people what music really will. Meant she thought of the young girl in the village who had once lost her father and sat quietly by the piano while Clara played until she smiled again. She thought of the old man who visited every Sunday to listen because it reminded him of his late wife. Clara didn't have certificates or awards, but she had memories, real ones, full of feeling. The next morning, Clara gave her answer. "I will go," she told Herr Bowman, "not to compete but to share." Preparations began. The village was buzzing with excitement. People helped her pack, bought her a simple new dress, and even fixed her suitcase. They didn't have much, but they gave what they could. A local driver offered to take her to Salzburg. The children painted little cards saying, "Good luck, Clara, and play from your heart." Clara practiced every day, but not in the way Stefan Adler did. She didn't repeat fast scales or difficult exercises. Instead, she sat at her piano and thought of people. She thought of emotions, stories, and the sounds of the lake and the birds. She composed a piece, not with notes, written on paper, but with memories. It started quietly, like morning fog over the mountains, then slowly grew stronger, like sunlight breaking through clouds. Her music told a story of life, simple, beautiful, and honest. As the day of the gala came closer, Clara felt nervous, but not afraid. She didn't care what critics would say. She didn't care if people laughed. All she wanted was to play with honesty, to show that music was not about being the fastest or loudest, but about being true. When the day finally came, Clara stepped into the car, holding her grandmother's locket around her neck and a calm smile on her face. The road to Salzburg was long, winding through green hills and across quiet rivers. As she looked out the window, she wondered what kind of man Stefan Adler was. Did he ever play for someone who just needed comfort? Did he ever smile while playing? Not because of applause, but because the music made him feel whole. She didn't know what would happen at the gala. She didn't expect to win anything. But deep inside, she believed something important, that music belonged to everyone, not just to the rich or the trained. That even a woman from a small village with an old piano and no sheet music had something valuable to say. And so Clara Weiss continued her journey, carrying nothing but a suitcase, a simple dress, and a heart full of music the world had never heard before. The day of the Salzburg Gala had finally arrived. The Grand Theater was alive with excitement. The building, old and beautiful, stood tall like a palace. Its walls were decorated with golden designs, tall mirrors, and chandeliers that sparkled like stars. People from all over the country had come to watch the piano performances. Some wore suits and long dresses, others held notebooks and cameras. Everyone was talking about one thing: the piano duel between Stefan Adler and Clara Weiss. For weeks, this event had been discussed in newspapers, on TV, and on social media. Some people were curious, others excited, and many were confused.
Ow.
Could a famous world-class pianist challenge a woman from a small mountain village? What would happen when two very different worlds met on the same stage? Inside the theater, the lights dimmed slowly, and a quiet hush fell over the crowd. The host stepped onto the stage and spoke into the microphone with a calm voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight you will witness something special. a celebration of music from two hearts, two paths, and two truths. Backstage, Stefan Adler stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of his expensive black tuxedo. His hair was perfect, his shoes shined like glass, and he held himself with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. But inside he felt a strange energy. He wasn't nervous, at least he didn't think he was, but there was something about tonight that felt different. He had faced many pianists before, but this time, the audience wasn't just there to watch him shine. They were also waiting for someone else. Then Clara arrived. She walked through the back entrance quietly, holding a small handbag and wearing a simple but elegant blue dress. Her hair was tied back gently, and around her neck was the same old locket that once belonged to her grandmother. The backstage staff looked at her with curiosity. She didn't look like a performer. She looked like someone who had come to watch, not to play. But there was something peaceful about her. She smiled kindly at everyone and thanked the stage manager softly. Stefan noticed her from a distance. She didn't seem nervous. In fact, she looked like she was exactly where she needed to be. That surprised him. The time had come. The host announced the beginning of the duel. The audience clapped politely as Stefan walked onto the stage, his back straight and proud. Two grand pianos sat side by side under the stage lights, shining black and perfect in shape. Stefan took his seat at the left piano. He bowed slightly, placed his fingers on the keys, and began. He had chosen a powerful and difficult piece, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto. No. 3. It was known across the world as one of the hardest classical pieces ever written. His fingers flew over the keys with speed and precision. Every note was clean. Every change in tempo was controlled. The audience listened closely, impressed by his skill. Many nodded, whispered, and smiled at each other. Yes, this was Stefan Adler, professional, polished, powerful. When he finished, the audience clapped again, louder this time. Stefan stood, bowed, and walked to the side of the stage with a small smile, but his eyes were not proud. He looked curious now, and perhaps even a little unsure. Then the host announced Clara Weiss. A few people whispered. Some leaned forward. In their seats, trying to get a better look at the woman everyone had talked about, Clara walked onto the stage with quiet steps. Her hands were held together gently, and she bowed without saying a word. She sat at the right piano, closed her eyes for a few seconds, and took a deep breath. She didn't play a famous piece. There was no title to what she was about to play, no sheet music in front of her. What she played came from inside her. The first note was soft, like a whisper. Then came another, then another. The sound was gentle, almost like the beginning of a story. Her fingers moved slowly, but with meaning. Each note seemed to say something. Some notes felt like smiles. Others sounded like quiet tears. The music began to grow, slowly like the rising sun over a mountain. The audience became very quiet. Even those who had been talking before now sat still. The sound of Clara's piano filled the room not with volume, but with feeling. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't trying to impress. She was telling a story that didn't need words. She played memories. The music told of childhood, of laughter, of losing someone and finding strength again. It told of simple joys like holding a loved one's hand or watching the rain fall from the window. Her fingers moved not with speed, but with emotion. Sometimes she paused just for a second, and in that small silence, people felt something deep inside. A woman in the front row began to cry. A man in the third row closed his eyes and held his wife's hand tightly. Even the journalists who had come with pens and cameras forgot to take notes. They just listened. The music changed again. It became brighter, warmer, not like hope returning. After sadness, like light at the end of a long tunnel. And finally, after what felt like a journey, Clara played her last note. It was gentle and soft, like the final word of a letter written from the heart. Then silence. No one moved. For a full 10 seconds, the theater was completely still. Then someone stood up and began to clap. Then another and another. Within moments, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding louder than they had all night. People were wiping tears, smiling, holding each other. It wasn't just a performance. It was an experience. Clara stood, bowed quietly again, and walked off the stage with the same calm expression. She wasn't looking for praise. She was just happy to have shared her music. Backstage, Stefan stood watching her. He didn't say a word. For the first time in years, he had no comment, no judgment, no corrections. He simply stood there, deep. In thought, he had come to prove a point. He thought the duel would be easy. He thought skill would win over feeling. But he had just witnessed something he hadn't expected. A woman who didn't study in great schools, who never read notes, who never played for awards, but who had just touched the hearts of hundreds of people. When the host came backstage to ask for his thoughts, Stefan simply shook his head and said, "She reminded me what music is. I thought I knew. I was wrong." That night, people left the theater talking not about Stefan Adler's perfect technique, but about Clara Weiss's quiet magic. No one forgot the way she made them feel. Her story spread beyond Salzburg, across the country, and even into other parts of the world. Videos of her performance were shared everywhere. People from different languages and cultures all said the same thing. Her music speaks to the soul. Clara returned to Hallstatt the next morning, where she didn't wait for interviews or awards. She went back to her bakery, back to her small piano, back to the life she loved. But something had changed, had shown the world that real music doesn't always come from grand stages. Sometimes it comes from the heart of a woman who plays. Not for applause, but for love. Stefan Adler stood in the shadowed corner of the stage, watching Clara as she quietly walked off. She didn't seem proud, didn't even look at the cheering crowd. She just gave a soft smile and stepped down like nothing special had happened. But what she had done was beyond special. It had changed everything. The applause still echoed in the hall. Some people were crying, others smiling, and many were standing still, not ready to leave. It wasn't just that Clara had played beautifully. It was the way she made people feel. For the first time in years, Stefan Adler didn't know what to say. He had performed with perfect skill, yet something inside him felt empty. Clara's music, so soft and full of emotion, had touched something deep in everyone evident in him. He walked slowly to the dressing room, passing people who now looked at him differently. They still respected him, yes, but their eyes weren't full of excitement anymore. Their eyes were soft, distant, still lost in Clara's music. And Stefan knew why. They hadn't just listened to a performance, they had felt a story, lived a memory, shared a quiet truth. Something he had not given them. He sat down in front of the mirror in his dressing room. The lights above it glowed, but he didn't look at his reflection. He just sat there, staring at the floor. For years, he had believed music was about perfection. Every note clean, every rhythm exact. He had trained all his life to be fast, sharp, and flawless. But now he realized something that made his heart sink. Music without feeling was just sound. Stefan remembered something from his childhood. When he was young, maybe 10 or 11, his mother used to sit by him while he practiced. She would say, "Play with your heart, not just your fingers." Back then, he used to play small songs for her, little lullabies, love songs, quiet melodies. She always smiled, sometimes even cried. But as he grew up, he pushed all that aside. Teachers told him to focus on technique. Competitions told him to be faster and stronger. The applause told him he was the best when he was loud, fast, and perfect. So, he forgot about the soft songs, forgot about his mother's words, until tonight. Now, those memories came rushing back. His mother had died years ago. He had never played one of her favorite songs after she passed. Maybe because it hurt. Maybe because it didn't fit the image of a world-class pianist. But now he wished he had. Clara had reminded him of something he had lost a long time ago, the true meaning of music. Back on the main stage, the host returned to thank both performers. He called them both winners of the heart, but everyone knew the truth. Clara had not won because she was better. She had won because she had been honest, open, and real. The reporters surrounded her as she left the stage. The cameras flashed. People asked her questions. How did you learn to play? What inspired your piece? How does it feel to outshine Stefan Adler? Clara gave the same answer every time. I didn't come here to shine, I came to share. She didn't mention Stefan at all. She didn't make fun of him or act proud. She simply thanked the audience, the organizers, and her grandmother, and then said softly, I'm going home now. While Clara was being driven back to Hallstatt, Stefan sat alone in his room. Hours passed, but he didn't move. His phone rang many times. Messages came in from music critics, fellow musicians, even fans, but he didn't answer. He needed silence. It's not the kind found in a concert hall after a performance, but the kind that allows someone to listen to themselves. Finally, just before sunrise, Stefan walked over to his piano in the room. He sat down slowly, like a man meeting an old friend he had hurt. He didn't open a book of sheet music. He didn't choose a difficult classical piece. Instead, he placed his hands gently on the keys and began to play something he hadn't played in years, his mother's favorite lullaby. The first few notes were shaky. His hands, usually so sure, trembled slightly. But as he continued, the music flowed more naturally. He wasn't playing for an audience. He wasn't performing. He was remembering. With every note, tears filled his eyes. And for the first time in decades, Stefan Adler cried at his own piano. Days passed. The internet was still full of stories about the piano duel. Articles titled The Heartbeat of a Village Woman and When the Soul Played Louder Than Fame were everywhere. Clara's performance had touched the world. But Clara, back in her village, was already back to her old life. She returned to the bakery, helped her aunt, and played for her neighbors in the evenings. Nothing had changed for her, except that more people now came to visit Hallstatt just to hear her play. Stefan, on the other hand, had changed completely. Canceled a few of his upcoming concerts not out of pride or shame, but because he needed time. He traveled to small towns, walked quietly through streets, and even visited music schools for children. In one of the schools, he saw a little girl playing a simple tune with 2 fingers. Her father was watching, smiling. Stefan sat beside her and said, "That was beautiful. May I play something with you?" It was the first time in years he had played beside someone without feeling the need to prove himself. He returned to Vienna with a new purpose, spoke at a music event. But this time, his words were softer.
Humbler.
I used to think music was about being perfect, he said. Then someone showed me it's about being true. I want to teach again not just how to play notes, but how to feel them. He opened free music workshops in poorer areas of the city, invited people who had never played before, children, old people, those with no training at all. He wanted to listen to their music, not judge it. And in every session, he told them about Clara Weiss, the woman who changed his life without saying a single bad word about him. One day, Stefan wrote Clara a letter. It's not for the public, not for anyone else to see. Just a quiet, handwritten note. Dear Clara, you gave me something I didn't know I had lost. You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. I challenged you to a duel. But what I got was a lesson. Thank you for playing with your soul. I hope one day I can learn to do the same. With respect, Stefan Clara read the letter and smiled. She placed it in the same wooden box where she kept her grandmother's music pages and old photographs. She never replied, but she never threw it away. In the end, Stefan Adler didn't become less famous, but he became more human. And Clara Weiss didn't become a celebrity. But she became a symbol of what real music means, to people from different worlds brought together by one shared truth, that music, when played from the heart, can change even the proudest soul. And that moment, when Stefan watched Clara perform, would stay with him forever, not as a defeat, but as the beginning of a new understanding. The moment when silence taught him more than sound ever had. Weeks passed after the famous piano duel in Salzburg. People across Europe were still talking about it. Some called it the night the soul won. Others said it was the most emotional concert they had ever witnessed. Everyone remembered Stefan Adler, the world-famous pianist, and Clara Weiss, the simple woman from the mountain village of Hallstatt. But while the story continued to live in people's hearts, the two musicians quietly returned to their lives. Both changed in very different but deep ways. Clara had come home to her peaceful village, where everything felt the same. The bakery still smelled of fresh bread every morning. The lake still sparkled in the afternoon light. and the children still laughed while chasing each other through the cobblestone streets. But something inside Clara had changed. Not because she had become famous, she had no interest in famous, but because she had shared her music with the world in the way she had always dreamed, honestly, gently, and from the heart. People began visiting Hallstatt, not as tourists, but as listeners. They came from cities and small towns, from different countries and languages. They sat outside her house, or at the small community center where she sometimes played. Some of them brought flowers, others brought nothing but their ears and hearts. Clara welcomed all of them with the same kindness. She never charged a fee. She never asked for attention. She just played softly, beautifully, until people forgot their worries and simply listened, even though she had touched thousands of hearts that night in Salzburg. Clara remained deeply rooted in her simple life. She helped her aunt in the bakery every morning. She cleaned her little house, took walks by the lake, and played with the village children in the park. When people asked her why she didn't move to a big city or start giving concerts around the world, she always smiled and said, "Music should live where the heart feels full. My heart feels full here." Far away in Vienna, Stefan Adler's life had also changed in a way no one expected. Before the duel, he lived like a king, luxurious apartment, international fame, people treating him like a legend. Now he lived with more silence and more truth. He had not stopped playing, but his music had softened. There was less pride in his fingers and more emotion, less perfection, more meaning. He opened free workshops for children who had no money to pay for music. Lessons. He invited students from orphanages, from poor families, and even children with disabilities. He sat with them, listened to them, and sometimes played alongside them. It wasn't about showing off anymore, it was about sharing. He taught them that music didn't have to be complicated, that even 2 or 3 notes played with love could move someone to tears one day. During a small music gathering, Stefan stood up to speak. His voice was gentle, very different from how he used to speak at events. "When I was younger," he said, "I believed music was only about being perfect. I thought fast fingers and flawless notes made a great pianist, but I was wrong. Music. It's about feeling. It's about connection. And the person who taught me that didn't study in grand halls or win awards. She played in a village with an old piano, and she reminded me why music exists: to bring people closer, to speak without words, to heal." The crowd clapped softly. Some were surprised to hear such humble words from someone who was once so proud. Others were touched by the honesty in his voice. People began to notice a new light in Stefan. He was no longer the untouchable master. He had become someone real, someone human. And though some critics still talked about technique and form, most people didn't care. They listened to his new music and felt something different. They could feel that he meant every note. A few months later, something beautiful happened. Stefan wrote a letter to Clara again. This time he invited her to co-host a music event for children in Berlin. It wasn't a competition or a show, it was a gathering where young people from different places could come, play, and learn from 2 very different musicians. Clara didn't reply immediately. She thought about it for a few days, then she smiled and said yes. When they met again in Berlin, it was like seeing 2 old friends. There was no tension, no pride. Stefan greeted Clara with a bow and said, "Thank you for coming. I'm honored." Clara laughed softly and replied, "I'm just here to share music with the children." During the event, Clara sat with a group of shy children, showing them how to trust their feelings instead of worrying about notes. She let them close their eyes and press keys gently, helping them listen to their own hearts. Stefan, too, played for the children, but not with his famous pieces. He played lullabies, happy tunes, and even a duet with Clara. The room was full of laughter and joy. It didn't feel like a formal event. It felt like family. After that day, more events followed. Sometimes Clara and Stefan met in small towns, sometimes in big cities. They didn't perform as a duo in huge concert halls. Instead, they visited schools, hospitals, and community centers. They played for people who needed hope, not entertainment. And everywhere they went, the same thing happened. People felt deeply moved, not by the power of the music, but by the honesty of it. Slowly, the world began to look at music differently. Clara's story became a legend. Books were written about her. A filmmaker even made a short documentary about her life. But Clara never changed. She still lived in her small cottage in Hallstatt, still baked bread, still played on her grandmother's old piano. One snowy winter evening, many years after the Salzburg duel, Stefan visited Clara's village. He arrived quietly, without cameras or crowds. He brought no grand gifts, only a notebook filled with melodies he had written since the day he heard her play. They sat by the fireplace, drank tea, and talked about life, not fame. Then Clara sat at her piano and said, "Would you like to play something with me?" Stefan nodded, sat beside her, placed his fingers on the keys, and together they played a soft, simple tune. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't loud. But it was full of peace, like the falling snow outside their window. That moment was not captured on video. There was no audience, no applause. But it was real, and it was perfect in its own quiet way. Over time, many people forgot who won what award, who played which piece, or who performed in which city. But they remembered the story of a proud pianist and a humble village woman. They remembered how music changed both of them. And they remembered how, in a world full of noise, one soft note played with love can echo forever. Clara Weiss never called herself a star. Stefan Adler no longer called himself the best. But both of them became something greater, true musicians, who played not to be remembered, but to help others feel something real. And that, in the end, was their greatest performance. It's not the one under bright lights, but the one that lived in hearts all around the world.